third thing which I want to stress upon here is that some critics argue that the term post-colonial literature misleadingly implies that colonialism is over, when in fact most of the nations involved are still culturally and economically subordinated to the rich industrial stresses through various forms of neo-colonialism. Even though they are technically independent, they are technically free, they are technically decolonized, yet they are still under their domination through other reasons, because of other reasons, like they have economic connections, ties. They are ruled by the economic superpowers. Fourth, it can be argued that this way of defining a whole era is Eurocentric, that it singles out the colonial experience as the most important fact about the countries involved. Surely that experience has had many powerful influences, but this is not necessarily the framework within which writers from, say, India, who have a long history, a pre-colonial literature, wish to be viewed. Indian writers generally don't like to be called post-colonial writers because their country has a long history, pre-colonial history, and this country has been a great power earlier. For instance, R.K. Narayan, one of the most popular and widely read of the modern Indian writers, displays a remarkable indifference to the historical experience of colonialism, a fact which results in his being almost entirely ignored by the post-colonial scholars. V.S. Naipaul is so fierce a critic of the post-colonial world, despite his origin as a descendant of Indian indentured laborers in Trinidad, that he is more often cited as an opponent than an ally of the post-colonial struggles. In fact, it is not uncommon for the citizens of post-colonial countries to accuse Americans and Europeans of practicing a form of neocolonialism themselves, in viewing their history through the particular lens, this lens of post-colonial literature. Fifth, many post-colonial authors do not share the general orientation of post-colonial scholars towards engaging in an ongoing, you can say, critique of the colonialism. Nigerian writers like Chinua Achebe and Wole Soyinka, for instance, after writing powerful indictments of the British in their country, turned to exposing the deeds of native-born dictators and corrupt officials within their independent homelands. Earlier, they criticized the political figures of the empire of England or France or other countries But later on, when they became independent, they saw that the rulers of their own countries were also corrupt. Although post-colonial scholars would explain this corruption as a byproduct of colonialism, such authors commonly have little interest in pursuing the train of thought. Sixth point. Post-colonialism as a term lends itself to very broad use. Australians and Canadians sometimes claim to live in post-colonial societies. But do they? Many would refuse them to label post-colonial because their literature is dominated by European immigrants and is therefore a literature of privilege rather than of protest. According to the usual post-colonial paradigm, only literature written by the natives, like native people in Canada and in Australia, would truly qualify the label of post-colonial literature. Similarly, the label is usually denied to the US literature. Though Americans' identity was formed by contradictions to that of England, because the US is usually viewed as the very epitome of modern neo-colonial nation, imposing its values, imposing its economic pressures and political interests on a wide range of free nations or weaker countries. So American society or American literature cannot be called post-colonial literature, because Americans have become very powerful and they are suppressing other nations economically, politically. The Irish are often put forward as an instance of a post-colonial European people. And indeed, many African writers have been inspired by Irish ones for that reason. Yet, some of the more nationalist ones, like Yeats, tended towards distressingly conservative, even reactionary politics. And James Joyce, another Irish writer, had the utmost contempt for British nationalism. It is not clear how many Irish authors would have accepted the term post-colonial for their literature, for their country, if they had known of it earlier. So this term cannot be applied on all the nations which were subjugated by European powers, by European empires. Although post-colonial theory generally confines itself to the past half century, it can be argued that everyone has been colonized at some time or the other. 5,000 years ago, Sumer started the process by uniting formerly independent city-states. And Namur similarly subjugated formerly independent Upper and Lower Egypt. Salman Rushdie likes to point out that England itself is a post-colonial nation, having been captured by Romans, having been captured by Normans, among others. Various, tribes, various invaders invaded England. So England also was subjugated. Not only is the term post-colonial exceedingly fuzzy, it can also be argued that it is also often ineffective. A good deal of post-colonial debate has to do with rival claims to victimhood, with each side claiming the sympathies of right-thinking people because of their past sufferings. The conflicts between Bosnians and Serbs, Palestinians and Jews, Turks and Greeks, Hindus and Muslims, Indians in India, and Catholics and Protestant Irish illustrate the problems with using historical suffering as justification for political pogrom. It is quite true that Europeans and Americans often arrogantly dismiss their own roles in creating the political mess of post-colonial nations around the world. But it is unclear how accusations against them promote the welfare of those nations. In addition, when they are made to feel guilty, countries like individuals are as likely to behave badly as they are to behave generously. So we should not openly accuse these notions because they react in an expected manner. We should be aware of that.